All right, I have another very interesting topic, inflammation, okay? Now, inflammation is a normal healing repair process, but the problem is when your body has chronic inflammation, all sorts of destruction can occur. And also an infection against a virus or a bacteria or another pathogen, it's our own body's reaction to that pathogen that creates the damage. In other words, it's our own immune inflammatory condition that creates the collateral damage that we should be concerned about and understand thoroughly in order to counter all this damage. I mean, think about a cytokine storm where you have this hyper-inflammatory immune response in your lungs. And doctors will give you prednisone, which is a synthetic cortisol to help calm it down. But it's the excess amount of inflammation that really creates this collateral damage. And then you have autoimmune diseases, right? Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, even alopecia, which is like patches of your hair falling out, is an autoimmune disease. And the common theme for autoimmune diseases is inflammation. So if you can get rid of inflammation, you can get rid of the complications and symptoms and problems with that autoimmune disease. Then you have old injuries where the body then creates this inflammation that then can persist chronically over years, creating all sorts of scar tissue, stiffness. And I have firsthand knowledge of that with my left elbow, with my back, with my ankles from all the massive injuries that I've experienced. And out of all the drugs, the top selling drugs, the number one worldwide selling drug is Humira. What is that drug for? Inflammation. And so a tremendous amount of people on this planet have too much inflammation. Now, before I get into the causes of inflammation, I want to touch on a new word that you may never heard before. It's called inflammatory onchotaxis. Now, what is that? It's a phenomenon where cancer tends to spread into areas of mechanical injury to your body. So we're talking about old injuries where there was inflammation, and that can be from many different things. You could have food irritation to your colon where you have this repetitive inflammatory response in your colon where the cancer spreads into. It could be in the lungs where you're a chronic smoker where you had inflammation. It could be in the arteries due to high levels of glucose because you are on a high carb diet. Or it can actually travel into breast tissue because you had some type of injury to your breast tissue. I mean, this is important data because this gives us prediction on where we might get cancer. So that way we can do something about it before we get cancer. All right, let's start with number one, the first cause of inflammation. This is a lack of cortisol. It's the main anti-inflammatory hormone in the body, cortisol. And so how would you get a lack of cortisol? Well, guess what? By having too much cortisol. Too much cortisol, just like too much insulin, creates cortisol resistance. And so you have the situation where you actually have a lot of cortisol flowing through your bloodstream because you're under a lot of stress, but it's not effective. It's not working. So if you look at a condition like Cushing syndrome, where you have high levels of cortisol, all the symptoms really relate to a deficiency of cortisol. That is because the receptors become resistant when you have high levels of that hormone flowing through your bloodstream. Same thing happens with diabetes. With diabetes, you have high levels of insulin because the glucose is high, but it doesn't work. That's why the blood sugars start going higher, because there's nothing there to push it down. Insulin is supposed to lower the blood sugar, but if it's ineffective, it's not going to do that. So any condition where you have an itis, whether it's bursitis, arthritis, tendinitis, usually involves a lack of cortisol because you have too much cortisol, and that's creating the resistance. Too much cortisol is very toxic, just as too much insulin. So it's just one way your body tends to protect against excess amounts of cortisol. But in the process, it gives you a lot of other symptoms. Now, just so you know, the best thing for anything related to itis is vitamin D. And I'm going to get to some of the remedies after I'm done with the causes. But what you should know is any condition where you have a need of prednisone or more cortisol because you have inflammation, you can substitute that with vitamin D. And at least doses of 10,000 IUs but probably 20 or 30 or even 40,000 IUs to create the effect, because vitamin D is the best anti-inflammatory. And it's not really even a vitamin, it's a hormone, which acts very similar to cortisol. All right, the next cause of inflammation is allergies, okay? So you have the obvious food allergies, like you're allergic to dairy. Now that could be casein, the protein in milk. And so if you eat dairy, it's going to create a constant inflammatory condition in your digestive system. What about gluten? That's the protein in wheat. How many people are allergic to gluten? Many, many people. And even if you don't have an allergy to gluten, you can have a gluten sensitivity. Or dairy, you might have lactose intolerance, right? You're not tolerant to the milk sugar. So all these things can create inflammation. And then you have environmental allergies, right? So you have, I don't know, let's say you're allergic to ragweed or something like that. That's exposing your sinuses or your throat or your lungs to this environmental allergy, and it's creating an irritation and inflammation. Or what about poison ivy? If I come, I don't know, 300 feet next to poison ivy, I'll start itching. So I am deadly allergic to poison ivy, and I seem to get it every single year. And at this point, I can't take anything for it because it doesn't work. And then you have another type of allergy where you're allergic to your own tissues, okay? That's called autoimmune. And you might not look at it like an allergy, but it's really an allergy to your own tissues where your immune system is attacking itself. You developed antibodies against your own tissue. And that could be for any tissue, like Hashimoto's, which is an allergy to your own thyroid hormones. You can have lupus, where you have this allergy to certain connective tissue, or you can have MS, where you have this allergy to your own myelin sheath in your brain. Myelin sheath is the coating around the nervous system. And if you think about what is the main treatment for autoimmune, Humira is one of the medications, but they also use prednisone because cortisol is a powerful anti-inflammatory. Cortisol has an immune suppressive action. It basically turns off the immune system. So it just turns it off. So now you don't have all these reactions. The problem is it comes with a package. If you have no immune system, you're more susceptible to having viruses invade the body and all sorts of things happening that you kind of lose your immune army. And in that process, without inflammation, without immune reactions, it can give you a whole series of additional problems. All right, number 3, let's talk about that. You have either acute infections or chronic infections. Now, it's pretty simple to understand. You get exposed to a virus or a bacteria, and then your immune system kicks in. You have this inflammatory reaction, and then it goes away. But what happens when you get chronic infections where the virus goes into the body and it goes into a dormant state and it keeps coming out of remission and then goes back in the remission, like Epstein-Barr virus, like Lyme's disease. And there's many infections that lie dormant, waiting for the right opportunity to come out and kick you when you're down. So these latent viruses tend to come out during times of stress. And so stress is a trigger for this infection that then will create inflammation. And so this just tells us that we need to strengthen our immune system. And the way to protect ourselves and prevent these viruses from coming out is just to stay super healthy, and then you're protected. All right, number 4, gut inflammation. So whether someone has an ulcer or gastritis or irritable bowel syndrome or some autoimmune disease, there could be several causes of this inflammation in the gut. Mainly it's going to be foods, okay? Now that could be a food allergy. It could be just inflammatory foods, as in high omega-6 fatty acids like soy oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil. These oils are so pervasive in our food supply, and you're going to be very susceptible to getting ulcers and inflammation in the gut, and even having a weak spot. So cancer can actually go into that area. Now, what about constipation? Well, that's like auto intoxication. You have this lack of flow of food being digested and everything's getting backed up. So that can actually create some inflammation as well. What about antibiotics? If you take antibiotics, you wipe out your friendly bacteria that's there to protect you and reduce inflammation. So if there's some way that you lose your flora in your gut, that could be the cause of why you have inflammation in your gut. In fact, when that inflammation exists, then it develops scar tissue in the colon, and it can affect your ability to absorb nutrients, and it can create leaky gut that then leads to more allergies and autoimmune diseases and a lot of other problems. So as a side note, for any type of gut inflammation going on, the best food actually is cabbage. Cabbage has unique things in it that are really good for gut inflammation. And cabbage seems to be easy to digest, especially if it's in like a fermented form like sauerkraut or like kimchi, things like that, or even like coleslaw or raw cabbage seems to be very, very beneficial for anyone with gastritis, with anyone with an ulcer, with anyone with inflammation in the gut. Another really good thing is the wheatgrass juice or wheatgrass juice powder, because the chlorophyll in there with other additional phytonutrients is very healing on the inside of your skin internally, whether it's in the throat, the stomach, the small intestine, or the large bowel. It goes in there and it tends to create a really cool effect. And what's ironic is wheat has gluten, but not wheatgrass juice powder, okay? Because they capture it before the seed exists, so there's no gluten. So it's very, very healing, but then if you eat wheat, it'll actually destroy the intestines. Another really good remedy for gut issues is zinc L-carnosine, okay? Just remember that because that's a good remedy for ulcers, gastritis. It's a good form of zinc that is very, very healing. All right, the next cause of inflammation, which is probably the most common, is glucose or sugar. Yeah, glucose and sugar and the other foods that turn into sugar, like refined carbohydrates. What it does is it raises this glucose flowing through your bloodstream, and this very thin layer of cells, which is one cell layer thick in your arteries, becomes seriously damaged, and you get this inflammatory condition. And then the body heals with either a clot or plaquing in the combination of cholesterol or protein or calcium. So you have this calcium buildup, and then you get heart problems and you get heart attacks and strokes. Other than that, you're perfectly fine. But when you lose the vascular supply and even the capillary supply to your eyes, you have eye damage, every different problem with the eye, like retinopathy, cataracts, macular degeneration. And if you lose capillary blood flow to the nerves, you get peripheral neuropathies. So you have this tingling and weird feeling in your feet. And high glucose also creates inflammation in your kidney and in your brain. Other than that, it doesn't pretty much attack anything else. Well, actually it does, but I'm just being sarcastic. Now, when you have high levels of glucose, insulin goes up. And then remember we talked about cortisol being resistant, insulin becomes resistant. And when you have insulin resistance, your body pumps out more insulin and you get more inflammation. So having the standard high carb diet is just creating a constant state of inflammation in many different parts of your body. But it's not only glucose that causes insulin resistance. It is also frequent eating, as in snacking. Every time you eat, you trigger insulin. So if you're eating so-called healthy foods, but you're eating a lot of snacks through the day, you're also going to create the same situation. So you need to go on a low carb diet, and you definitely need to do intermittent fasting. Very, very important. We'll touch on that in a bit. Now, number 6, your own fat cells, okay, can cause inflammation because there's certain type of pro-inflammatory molecules like cytokines that can then create more inflammation. And then inflammation itself can create insulin resistance. Interesting. So we have this two-way street where we have inflammation creating insulin resistance, and insulin resistance can create inflammation. It's a never-ending nightmare. All right, number 7, old injuries. I've touched on that, but old injuries can put you in a state of stiffness, inflammation, chronically. And so it's very, very important if you have old injuries and you have like arthritis to not also consume a lot of high glucose or any glucose. You want to be on a low carb diet to keep your inflammation at a minimum. And there's other things you want to do as well. But if you have arthritis and inflammation because of old injuries and you're still consuming carbs, I don't care how much turmeric or vitamin D or remedies that you take, it's not going to really work. Sometimes I'll see people with really bad arthritis and they're just taking pills, they're taking fish oil, and they're thinking that's going to solve the problem, when in fact, it's not going to even create a dent into their problem. And that is why I'm doing more of a comprehensive approach to this topic, because it's so important. Now, the next problem is very interesting. It is where you have a problem in your bile ducts. The bile ducts are the little tubes that connect from your liver to the gallbladder or small intestine. And if you have too much sludge in these little tubes, or you have a stone like a gallstone, that can create a lot of inflammation, usually on the right side of your body. Suspect there could be something wrong with the gallbladder, or usually it's going to be in the bile duct a little bit higher up, and you might have some sludge, not even a stone, but a thickened sludge caused because you don't have enough bile salts. I can't tell you how many times I've had patients come into my clinic when I was in practice with this problem. It's very, very common, yet not many people know about it. And they're getting all sorts of rehab treatments. They're taking thousands of vitamins, and it's not working. Okay. A real simple remedy for that condition is to start taking bile salts. Okay. Purified bile salts. And there's a lot to know about it. I put a link down below if you want more information. But another really good thinning agent for that problem is TUDCA. And you can buy it online and you take it on empty stomach, and it thins the bile, allows the flow of this sludge to go through, and magically all that pain goes away. All right, number 9, low vitamin D. Directly. I mean, vitamin D is a very powerful anti-inflammatory. If you're low in vitamin D, like the majority of the population is, you're more susceptible for inflammation and pain, okay? Especially in your lower back, but it could be anywhere, in your bones, in your joints, in your knees, in your neck. And so don't forget a vitamin D deficiency as one cause of inflammation. This is why vitamin D can help you prevent cancer. Why? Because it gets rid of inflammation. And if someone had cancer and they're in remission, the cancer can be reactivated by inflammation. Okay, so remember that, because you want to have a goal of just getting rid of inflammation everywhere in your body. That would be a very, very good survival goal. All right, number 10, high levels of omega-6 fatty acids and low levels of omega-3 fatty acids. So any foods with high omega-3 fatty acids like fish, cod liver oil, or cod liver, or fatty fish like salmon, or sardines, really, really good to keep your inflammation on the lower side. Some people that start fasting may develop inflammation because they're not consuming any omega-3 fatty acids. So anytime you're doing prolonged fasting, I always recommend taking the electrolytes, B vitamins, but also omega-3 fatty acids, because I've observed people getting arthritis when they're fasting, and they think it's a side effect from fasting, but really it's just a side effect because you have no omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are essential fatty acids. What does that mean, essential? It means that your body needs them and you can't make them, so you need to get them from the diet. And without them, you're going to have problems. And also on top of that, another compounding problem is we have way too much omega-6 fatty acids, and that's all the vegetable oils, which are really seed oils, grain oils, really, really bad, but it's in our food supply. It's definitely in any fast food restaurant you go to, or a lot of just regular restaurants. They'll put so much soy oil and corn oil in their cooking, whether it's eggs or something deep fried or whatever. So I always, when I go to a restaurant, I'll ask the chef, like, what type of oil do you use? And you'd be shocked to find out it's going to be something like soy oil. I will just not eat foods that are cooked with soy oil. And also start reading your ingredients, like in your dressings, right? If it says anything with soy oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil, I would avoid it, even if it's organic, okay? Your salad dressing should be olive oil and vinaigrette, something like that, or avocado oil. All right, then we have environmental toxins like plastics in the environment. Silicone breast implants could be a source of inflammation, and the thousands of other chemicals that we are bathed in on a regular basis. Now, I want to mention number 12 a second time because it's very, very important. It's not only the glucose that stimulates inflammation, it's the frequent eating because of the high levels of insulin. So one of the most important things you can do on top of everything else if you have inflammation is go low carb, okay? But really do the healthy version of keto, because that way you're adding in more nutrients. You're not just focusing on low carb, you're focusing on high quality foods that also give you additional health benefits, like really, really great cruciferous vegetables and large amounts of salad, which have phytonutrients that are very, very anti-inflammatory with loads of antioxidants. Because when you have inflammation, you're getting a lot of free radical damage. So you want the antioxidants from the food, as well as you want the antioxidants from your own body. Your body makes endogenous antioxidants. I'm talking like antioxidant networks. And one of the big stimulants for that is fasting. And one of the things that just crushes and destroys these antioxidants is frequent eating. So fasting is really key for inflammation. All right, number 13, too much iron, okay? Now, iron is a mineral. It's a trace mineral that you don't need in large amounts, and our bodies don't have mechanisms to get rid of iron. When you get an infection, both the good bacteria and the pathogens compete for this iron. Apparently, they eat iron. And so our bodies have this interesting mechanism to bind up iron during infections. And this is why people have a higher incidence of getting anemia when they have infections. And if you're deficient in iron going into an infection, and then you're coming out of an infection and you're fatigued and you have anemia, it could mean that you need more iron. And that's just a side note, but some people that have like a post-COVID fatigue, sometimes they need some iron. But typically, you don't want to overdo it with iron, because too much iron in your liver can create cirrhosis and create a lot of inflammation and a lot of scar tissue and fibrosis in the liver. But iron in general, in large amounts, can create inflammation. All right, now that you know all the causes of inflammation, let's talk about what to do. Number one, the most important thing is have enough vitamin D, at least 10,000 IUs, but if it's a chronic problem, take more, take 20, 30, even 40,000 IUs. If you're concerned about any toxicity, I put a video down below. You should watch that. Anytime you take vitamin D3, though, you also need K2 at the same time, especially if you're taking it on a regular basis, because vitamin K2 helps prevent the calcium buildup in the arteries. So K2 drives calcium from the blood and the joints back into the bone. So if people are concerned with the side effect of vitamin D toxicity, which is hypercalcemia, because the calcium builds up in the arteries, well, guess what? K2 handles that. It protects you against this excess calcium. So they both work together. So realize the ratios are 10,000 international units of vitamin D3 to 100 micrograms, not milligrams, of K2. Okay, so that's the ratio. So if you go up with your D3 to 20,000 IUs, then you need 200 micrograms of K2. All right, number two, avoid those things that are triggering your allergies, like in environmental allergies, as in food allergies. That's really, really important. But what's really interesting about allergies in general is that you can get rid of allergies by doing periodic prolonged fasting. Yeah, because you strengthen the immune system when you do fasting. There's some great data on that. I've done videos on that. But yeah, so you don't have to live with your allergies. All right, number three, chronic infections. The best way to handle that, especially if it's like Epstein-Barr virus or some type of virus that's lodged in your body, is to take regular vitamin D, which is good for the immune system, as well as regular vitamin C. But make sure the vitamin C is not synthetic. Use a whole food form. You can also do herbs that are antibacterial as well, because they don't have the side effects, like garlic, thyme, oregano oil. I've done videos on that. I'll put the links down below. All right, for any gut issue, don't forget about zinc L-carnosine, a really good form of zinc, and for heart problems, okay, like in heart attacks, preventing heart attacks, things like that. One of the best vitamins is vitamin E, but not tocopherol. You want to take tocotrienols, okay, 300 milligrams. Very, very important because it's like 50 times stronger, and it can actually clean up the free radical damage and inflammation in the heart. And realize that you also need to, at the same time, get rid of the cause of that problem, which is consuming too much sugar. Okay, you got to go low carb to really get rid of that oxidation that's happening. But vitamin E can greatly reduce the inflammation in the inside of your arteries, as well as the inflammation in your liver. All right, number 6, the most important thing, low carb, intermittent fasting. If you're new to my channel, click the link down below. Vital and important action, okay? That's the most important thing you can do. All right, number 7, you need to do intermittent fasting and periodic prolonged fasting. That's going to drop inflammation. Also take regular amounts of vitamin D, and turmeric is a very, very good natural compound to reduce inflammation. Just make sure that the source of turmeric is from a really good place. Recently, I found a farmer who grows the stuff in his greenhouse, and it's the best turmeric I've ever found. He dries it out, chops it up, and I buy it from him, and I actually chew it, and it is like explodes in your mouth, but it's a really good source. But there's a lot of herbal things you can take for inflammation, like stinging nettle root, another one of my favorites. All right, number 8, anytime you have right-sided inflammation or pain, don't forget purified bile salts, or TUDCA is a type of purified bile salts that you can take. But then you need to work more on the gallbladder and, of course, your diet as well. All right, number 9, start increasing your omega-3 fatty acids, which I talked about, and decreasing your omega-6 fatty acids. And number 10, be careful with the iron. So I wouldn't recommend cooking in iron skillets. I wouldn't recommend taking these multivitamins, the real popular ones with a lot of iron in them. Not a good idea. In fact, I'm very hesitant taking any vitamins with added iron unless it's in the right form. But you'd be shocked to find out some of the lead multivitamin minerals really just have this like iron, or this elemental iron that is like not the right type for our bodies. And the other problem with iron is fortified in all the grain products. So in one video I did a while ago, is I showed people how you can take a magnet, okay, a strong magnet, and dump out like a box of cereal on a platform, take the magnet, and it picks up the cereal because of the added iron, the fortification of iron in those wheat products. But of course, if you've been watching my channel, you're not consuming grains, so you're totally safe. All right, so now that you have a superior level of understanding about inflammation, I'm going to show you a great technique on how to get rid of pain, okay? Check it out, it's right here.